Echoes of Old, the story of Miss Primrose. Just to give you a brief recap, I started a new series and they're all on these uncoated panels, which I clear coated to keep the raw color so they all had a similar look. And then I created AI reference images and a color palette for the whole series, so they all had the same look. And then I began to paint the series, and once I did, I got stories to develop in my mind about the person in this series and where she lives, and I call her Miss Primrose. And I developed a small story, and I'm going to read it to you while I paint the next painting in the series, which is her cottage in the countryside. But before we do that, I want to tell you where we are. Each October, my family ascends onto our property called Camp Easy, which sits in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And so being here is one of my favorite things on earth, and it's my favorite place on earth. And this time of year, the foliage and the crisp air and the atmosphere is electric. And each day I stole away time to paint, and I got immersed in Mrs. Primrose's story in my head. And isn't that wonderful that we can develop a whole story around ideas that we can paint and make come alive? And even if nobody understands the stories or hears the stories, it's an important factor of creating it, because each brushstroke holds that excitement, that story that you infuse into it as an artist. So being here, immersed in this landscape and these colors, I just had a wonderful time developing this story in my head and in my heart. And so I thought I'd read it to you while I was painting her. No, I thought I'd read it to you while I was painting her house, her cottage in the countryside. So enjoy. It was sometime around 1812, in a small country parish where the fields rolled like a sea of golden linen. Miss Primrose lived there, in a white farmhouse with ivy that climbed up the walls, and the garden forever filled with bees and peonies. She was known as a gentle soul, never in a hurry, often seen walking the lanes with her straw hat and her sketchbook pressed against her heart. Her days followed the rhythm of the land. Mornings began with a kettle, singing softly on the stove. Afternoons spent painting by the window and in the meadow where the breeze lifted her hem of her dress. But there was something else, a quiet purpose in her paintings. She was writing to someone, not with words, but with color. Each landscape she painted was a message sent carefully by post to a man she could not name aloud. In another time, perhaps they might have married or lived side by side, but life had written them different stories. So she painted instead a winding road for the journey they never took, a riverbank where they once sat beneath the willows, a sky the color of faded violets, carrying the primrose of another spring. Her cousin, Clara, came to visit that summer, full of laughter and ink-stained fingers, always writing in her small leather notebook. She adored her cousin, calmness, and watched her paint for hours, writing down notes and small details. The smell of the linseed, the hum of the bees, the way Miss Primrose tilted her head as if listening to something far away. "What are you painting today?" Clara would ask, and Miss Primrose would smile faintly and say, "Just a letter that doesn't need words." When autumn came, the leaves burned gold and the air turned sweet and sad all at once. Clara left for London, and Miss Primrose continued to paint, sending her tiny letters into the world. Landscapes wrapped in brown paper and tied with ribbon, each one carrying a secret. Years later, long after both women were gone, the farmhouse stood empty. But one day, a young artist, perhaps not so different from you and me, found herself wandering through the countryside and stumbled upon that very place. In a small chest by the window, she found a stack of letters and a little leather notebook. The pages were filled with Clara's delicate handwriting. Today she painted the orchard again. The sky looked as if it remembered something. She smiled more today. A letter must have come. The young artist turned each page slowly, imagining the women who had lived and dreamed there. And she began to paint, not to recreate what she saw, but to honor what she felt. The fields, the light, the quiet hope, the art could carry love across time. And from those brushstrokes was born a new collection, Echoes of Old. one of the things I love most about painting. How it lets us build small worlds of our own. How stories can bloom from color and silence. Even if no one else knows the story behind the painting, the emotion still shines through, brushstrokes by brushstroke, like a whisper from the past. So maybe Miss Primrose never truly vanished. Maybe she's still here, and every warm tone of ochre, every soft edge of light, echoes through the canvas, reminding us that beauty never really fades. It just lingers in another form.